My jealous stepsister slept with my husband, took my life, and now she wants me to support her wedding. Here's how I got my revenge. My husband, Mark, 54 meters, and I am Jessica, 46F, had been together for nearly 11 years, married for 8. At the start, we were inseparable, sharing moments filled with laughter, dreams, and all the little things that made us fall more in love. We were a perfect match, taking on life together, our smiles infectious, and everything felt brighter when we were together. Year after year, we celebrated our love with cozy Sundays and spontaneous date nights. Life was simple, and we savored every second of it. But suddenly, things began to shift. Date nights started to feel awkward, and the laughter was less frequent. I began to notice Mark spending more and more time on his phone instead of with me. Date nights became tense, and the once easy connection between us faded. I felt something was slipping, and I couldn't ignore it. The intimacy we once had was diminishing, replaced by an ever-growing distance. I started to wonder if Mark might be having an affair. The late-night calls and secretive messages were happening too often for me to overlook. I questioned his behavior, noticing how distant he had become even when we were right next to each other. Mark dismissed my concerns, telling me I was overthinking things and that he was just swamped with work. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One Friday night, I decided to surprise Mark with a dinner, hoping to reconnect. I eagerly drove to his office to pick him up, dreaming of a night full of closeness and joy. However, my excitement quickly turned to disappointment when I received a message from him saying he'd be working late. Accepting the change of plans, I stayed in the car, waiting for him downstairs without telling him I was there. As I prepared to leave, I saw Mark exiting his office. Confused, I watched him get into his car and drive off. He'd said he had a heavy workload, so why was he leaving? Curiosity got the best of me, and I followed him. What I witnessed that night would haunt me forever. Mark pulled into a bar, and I couldn't understand why he'd lied about working late. I watched as Mark sat at a table, but when the woman sitting across from him turned, my heart stopped. It was my stepsister, Emily. My legs felt weak, and the sight of them together hit me like a ton of bricks. They were holding hands, sharing laughs. The betrayal was unbearable, and I could feel nausea rising within me. The realization shattered me. My own husband was cheating on me with Emily. I left the bar in a daze, determined not to let them know I was there. That night was the hardest of my life. I'd never felt such deep pain since I lost my father years ago. The man I loved was with my stepsister, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it. To provide some context, my parents divorced when I was very young, and my mom remarried Harry, who had a daughter from his first marriage, Emily. At first, Emily and I got along well despite our 4-year age difference. However, our relationship began to fray when I started noticing her knack for manipulation. She was a master at turning situations to her advantage, whether it was deceiving our parents to avoid consequences or lying to strangers without hesitation. Emily's manipulative tendencies knew no bounds. For some reason, she always seemed jealous of me, even though we both came from broken homes. No matter how hard I tried, I could never get her to like me. As we grew up and eventually went to college, I saw less and less of her. I had secured a full scholarship and relished my college days, making new friends, exploring different subjects, and enjoying the freedom of youth. I came home less frequently and eventually stopped communicating with Emily, except at family events. Even though I kept my distance, she continued to be cruel. Over the years, she would make subtle, hurtful remarks about my appearance whenever we were alone. Comments about my clothing or sly digs suggesting I should hit the gym more often. Her words were designed to chip away at my confidence. I always tried my best to ignore them. Emily didn't stop there. She would act overly friendly with my then boyfriend, now husband. She'd compliment him, saying he deserved someone better looking or remarking on how attractive his gym photos were. I remember Mark would get visibly uncomfortable, blushing at her comments. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking that's just how Emily was. Flirtatious and inappropriate with everyone I introduced to my family. Since my marriage, she had toned down her behavior, so I didn't think much of it. But after discovering them together at the pub that night, I knew something had been going on for a while. They looked too comfortable, too cozy. When Mark came home that night, I pretended to be asleep, His scent of whiskey and sweat filled the room, and he didn't even bother trying to hide it. His arrogance, thinking he could get away with it, was clear. I stayed awake all night, planning my next steps. The next morning, before he woke up, I took his phone and went through his messages, calls, emails, and photos, documenting everything and taking photos on my own phone. After Mark left for work, I decided to visit my mom. I knew she was the only one who could comfort me. With my stepdad at work, I had privacy to talk to her. When I told her about the affair, she was as shocked as I was. She almost didn't believe me until I showed her the evidence. She was furious that Mark and Emily could betray me like this. My mom, being the strong rock she is, immediately made plans to confront them in front of everyone. We decided to call a family dinner at my place that weekend. My mom asked me to keep quiet and not let Mark know anything before the event. On the day of the dinner, everyone arrived, cheerful and excited. After a nice meal, as people were sipping wine, I exchanged a glance with my mom. She understood and got up to grab the projector. I clinked my glass to get everyone's attention and thanked them for coming. My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. I told them, "I've invited you all here for a special reason, something I've been dealing with for a while. Please pay attention to the projector. I have a surprise for you." The room filled with curiosity as everyone turned their attention to the screen. My mom had set up the projector, and I took a deep breath, bracing myself to reveal the painful truth. I connected it to my phone and began scrolling through the images and messages I had gathered from my husband's phone. The room fell into a hushed silence as everyone watched the screen. The first image appeared, showing Mark and Emily in an intimate pose. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room, and everyone looked at each other confused. "This isn't easy for me, but I feel you all need to know the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "These pictures and messages are evidence of an affair between my husband Mark and my stepsister Emily." The room erupted into disbelief, anger, and shock. Eyes widened and jaws dropped as the evidence unfolded before them. My mom's face reflected a mix of fury and sorrow, and I could feel the tension building. She stood beside me, holding my hand, silently showing her support. I continued scrolling through the damning messages, exposing the depth of the betrayal. The more I revealed, the more the shock in the room turned into palpable anger. I turned to face Mark and Emily, who sat in stunned silence. Mark's face was flushed with guilt, and Emily, once so manipulative and cunning, now seemed small and exposed. The room seemed to vibrate with the collective anger of those present. My mom stepped forward, her voice sharp and filled with disappointment. "How could you do this to our family? To your spouse? To your sister?" she demanded, her eyes boring into Mark and Emily. My stepdad looked directly at Emily and asked if what I had shown was true. Emily burst into tears, the weight of his words hitting her hard. Other family members began to express their disbelief and outrage. Some exchanged glances, shaking their heads, while others whispered angry comments to each other. Mark and Emily, cornered by the damning evidence and the furious reactions around them, sat there speechless, unable to defend their actions. The room pulsed with the weight of the truth, and though my heart was heavy, I felt a strange sense of relief. The secret was out, and the deception was laid bare for all to see. I spoke up again, addressing the room. "I didn't bring you all here just to expose them, but also to let you know that I will be divorcing Mark. If Emily wants to have my husband, then she can have him. I appreciate all your support during this difficult time." As the shock turned into solidarity, the room united in support of me. Friends and family offered comforting words and condemnation for Mark and Emily. Mark's face had turned red, and he stormed out in humiliation. Emily followed him, clearly finding an excuse to escape the situation. My mom hugged me tightly, and I started to cry. All the pain I had been hiding inside me came flooding out. In the months that followed, I found myself emotionally drained, unable to summon the strength to get out of bed. The weight of the betrayal, combined with the exhaustion of countless tears, left me feeling like a mere shell of myself. Sleep became both my refuge and escape from the painful reality. I kicked Mark out of our home as we began sorting through our divorce. It was a long and grueling journey, but I knew I wanted to be divorced from him as soon as possible. 2 days ago, after months of legal proceedings, the court finally granted our divorce. I was beyond happy, and I spent the day with my mom shopping and eating ice cream. For the first time in a long while, I felt liberated and free. That evening, while we were enjoying a movie at my mom's house, my stepdad came into the room, looking upset. My mom asked him what was wrong, but he looked at me with concern. I sat up straight, asking if something had happened. He asked if I had seen what Emily had posted on Facebook recently. I shook my head and opened my phone to search for her profile. With bated breath, I clicked on her page and saw her latest picture with Mark. They were smiling and looking at each other lovingly. She captioned it with, "So happy to be engaged." My breath stopped as I read the caption, and then I noticed she was wearing a ring. I was beyond shocked, to say the least. My mom, who was looking at me curiously, snatched the phone from my hand and cried out in disbelief as she realized that Emily was indeed marrying Mark. I don't even remember what happened for the rest of the night. Overwhelmed by shock and disbelief, I sank back into the couch, my mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. The room seemed to close in on me as I grappled with the reality of the situation. My mom, equally stunned, tried to comfort me, but words failed both of us. As if this wasn't bad enough, my stepdad received a call from Emily. She was probably calling to share the news with him. I asked him to please put her on speakers so I could hear what she had to say. My stepdad nodded and picked up the call, quietly listening to her as she gushed over her engagement and how happy she was to be marrying Mark. I listened to her words, heartbroken and feeling completely empty inside. My stepdad then angrily told her, "Emily, what you've done today is not just incredibly insensitive and hurtful to your stepsister, but it is going to affect the entire family." Emily, upset by his reaction, retorted, "I don't understand, Dad. Mark and I are in love, and we're getting married. What's wrong with celebrating that?" My stepdad sternly replied, "What's wrong, Emily, is the way you've gone about it. You had an affair, and you think that's okay? Your actions have caused immense pain to someone you should consider family. Instead of being respectful and understanding, you are now flaunting your engagement in front of her and the rest of us, without a thought for the consequences." Hearing his words, I broke down crying as my mom consoled me. I guess that's when Emily realized my stepdad wasn't alone. She asked him if I was in the room, and he said yes. Emily then started pleading, asking if she could talk to me. My stepdad looked at me curiously, and I took the phone from him. I started asking her if she even knew what she was getting herself into. The conversation turned even more painful as Emily began talking about how much it would mean to them if I could deliver a speech at their wedding to show everyone that I was okay with their marriage. Stunned, I found myself at a loss for words. Without hesitation, my mom swiftly took the phone from my hands and addressed Emily directly, her voice firm and filled with disappointment. The hurt fueled a fire within me. Instead of letting this revelation shatter me, I decided to turn the tables. I knew I had to face this head-on and come out stronger. I wasn't going to let them steal my happiness and mental peace. A plan began forming in my mind, and I was determined to make Emily regret ever involving me in this. I opened my laptop and started scrolling through her social media profiles, scanning every picture she had ever posted. As luck would have it, I finally found the perfect image. It was of her ex, someone who had caused her an emotional breakup, and I knew for a fact that she would be shocked to see me arm in arm with him. My mom's eyes widened in realization, and I grinned at her mischievously. She gave me a subtle nod of approval, confirming she understood my plan. My stepdad, on the other hand, thought I might be taking things too far and advised me not to ruin Emily's wedding. But I was determined. This would be my revenge. Do you think I'm the a-hole for taking my stepsister's ex to her wedding after she decided to sleep with my husband? It all started when I reached out to Ron, Emily's ex, with a bold plan. He responded, and we began talking. I was upfront about my identity as Emily's stepsister and Mark's soon-to-be ex-wife. I explained my situation and my plan to take him as my +1 to their wedding. Ron seemed intrigued but curious about why I was involving him. I told him everything: how Emily had cheated with Mark, my husband of 8 years, and how they were now getting married. I wanted to take him along to make Emily feel the way she had made me feel, betrayed and humiliated. A lot has happened since then, and I've taken some time to settle down. But as I mentioned earlier, I did go through with it. When the day of their wedding arrived, I put on a brave face. Dressed in an outfit that radiated confidence, I walked into the venue with Ron by my side. The moment Mark saw me with him, his eyes widened in shock. He must have immediately recognized Ron as Emily's ex. Ignoring his reaction, Ron and I casually found our seats, pretending to be unaffected by the stares around us. When Emily entered the room, she was glowing with excitement, but her face fell the instant she saw me. Her expression shifted further when her gaze landed on Ron. She froze, the music continuing as her stunned steps echoed through the room. My stepdad nudged her to keep walking, but Emily remained rooted in place, her eyes darting between us as she tried to process what was happening. I kept my composure, standing tall with an air of confidence. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel the collective curiosity as guests whispered among themselves. Finally, Ron stepped forward, his expression calm. "Hey, Emily," he said. "It's good to see you after all these years. We thought we'd share in the joy of your special day." Emily's face flushed with rage. "Joy?" she spat, her voice cutting through the hushed murmurs. "You call this joy? You're ruining everything." Her outburst left the room in stunned silence as guests turned to look at her with wide eyes. Ron, still composed, responded, "We're just here to celebrate your happiness. No need to turn this into a scene." Emily scoffed, glaring at him. "Celebrate with her? How can you even be with someone like her? Are you two dating now?" I shrugged, offering a small, knowing smile. "Like I said, Emily, you invited me. I'm just here to honor that invitation and wish you and Mark a lifetime of joy together. What happens between Ron and me is none of your concern, especially now." Emily let out an incredulous laugh, her anger boiling over. "You're unbelievable," she yelled before storming out of the room, her train swirling behind her. The door slammed shut, leaving an air of stunned disbelief in her wake. Guests exchanged bewildered glances, some attempting awkward smiles while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The atmosphere, once celebratory, now hung heavy with tension and confusion. Mark glared at me, his mouth opening as if to yell, but my mom cut him off firmly, telling him to keep quiet. "Jessica hasn't destroyed anything or broken anyone's marriage," she stated, her voice unwavering. "All she did was show Emily how it feels to have her own actions reflected back at her." Update 3. I am absolutely blown away by the response since my last update. In just a few days, the sheer volume of comments, messages, and opinions has been overwhelming. I'm glad that most of you seem to understand why I did what I did, though I also recognize and respect some of the negative reactions. To be completely honest, I don't regret my actions at all. My stepdad recently informed me that Mark and Emily have officially called it off. Emily refused to go through with the wedding, no matter how much Mark tried to convince her otherwise. She has apparently moved out of the house they had planned to share, and their engagement is over for good. As for Mark, he's reached out to me several times since the wedding, but I've decided to give him the space he needs. I have no intention of rekindling anything with him, but I do recognize that we need to establish some boundaries moving forward. In the aftermath of everything, I've made the decision to prioritize rebuilding my life and finding true happiness within myself. I've taken the advice of many of you and have already started looking for a good therapist to help me process the pain and chaos of the past few years. Therapy, I hope, will provide me with the tools I need to navigate these uncertain times with grace and strength. For now, my focus is on personal growth, rediscovering passions I'd left behind, reconnecting with people who genuinely support me, and surrounding myself with only positive influences. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I'm determined to make it one filled with healing and self-love. Thank you again to everyone who shared their thoughts and advice. Your support means more than you could know.